Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. This presentation is being recorded and will run approximately 60 minutes, including question and answer time at the end. It will also be available in the Events Industry Council's Knowledge Hub. All attendees today will receive their CEs approximately 1 week after the webinar. Before I turn things over to our presenters, I would like to address a few logistical items. Attendees can listen to the webinar through their computers or by dialing in using the number and passcode provided by the Zoom software. If you have any questions, you do not need to wait until the end of the presentation to submit them. We encourage you to submit your questions using the question box seen on the screen. We will address as many questions as we can at the end of the presentation. All attendees today will receive their CEs approximately 1 week after the webinar. And also, we welcome you to utilize the closed captioning function. Click on the CC button at the bottom of the screen and you will find the link to the subtitles. And now I will hand things over to our CEO of Events Industry Council, Amy Calvert. Amy.
Thank you, Derek. Welcome, everyone. It's really terrific to be able to spend this time with you today. I'm so grateful. I see all the panelists logging on. I see all the participants logging on and offering their greetings. And I'm always so encouraged by this, everyone taking this time together and really offering this moment for learning and some collaboration. So great to see you on this Friday. It's really a pleasure to be able to introduce our panelists, our esteemed panelists today. They are going to really host, I think, a really generous and important conversation. I have Allison Kinsley, who's also the chair of our Apex Commission. Allison, CMM, CMP, CED, Chief Meeting Architect with Kinsley Meetings, chairing this particular working group for the Apex Task Force. Kathy Schlossberg, who many of you know, PSAV Senior Vice President of Marketing. Kathy's been a fantastic supporter of this endeavor and also of EIC. I'm really grateful for all that Kathy does. And then, of course, Liz Warwick, Vice President of Meetings Management and Strategy with Liberty Mutual Insurance, chairing the Meeting and Event Design Working Group. These folks, in addition to our chairs, Mike Dominguez and Kristen Horstman, and of course some other really important contributors who are not participating on this webinar today, really gave their heart and soul to putting together this work that we'll walk through today. And I could not be more grateful, you know, at a time when we're talking about how do we come together to show our resilience and our commitment to this industry and all that it means to us, all the great people that work in our industry. I think this is a truly fabulous example of that commitment and that unity. So with that, we can go to the next slide, Derek. I'm just going to open it up today and talk a little bit about, you know, how we came to where we are as far as the Apex Business Recovery Task Force. And I think a good place to start is just to share with you a reminder about the industry, Events Industry Council, who we are. Our members that you see there in front of you are global and have been doing fantastic work to really show up in meaningful ways for the industry during this time. We represent over 33 member organizations, and what I always like to think about is, this is an organization that's really committed to working on behalf of the industry to take on some really important pan-industry global issues, and certainly this disruptive, global crisis is something that we have found to be, an area that we certainly didn't anticipate, but have come together and formed new alliances and really come together to do some fabulous work. So we can go on to the next slide. One of the things that the EIC has been known for over the years is the economic significance study, and I think one of the things that we have seen is that this research has been the foundation of many of the advocacy efforts that you have been a part of. We like to talk about the economic impact that the business events drive business outcomes, but they also are so key in building economies and supporting social impact. And I really believe in, at the end of the day, events themselves are going to be key drivers for our recovery. And so there's tremendous work, and we can go on to the next slide, Derek, tremendous work going on in terms of advocacy. The Events Industry Council does have some additional resources on our website. I encourage you to go visit that website and learn a little bit more about the letters and the templates that are available. One of the things that we're partnering with Go Live together on is a letter writing campaign for some work that's happening right now during the last 2 weeks of July. You know, we have a bit of a window to get involved and to support the effort to help push through some really important relief legislation that's underway and being discussed. So I think, you know, one of the key opportunities here is to get involved on behalf of your own organization, to really have a voice and take an active role in making sure that they understand the scope and the scale of this global industry. You know, we're over 26 million professionals worldwide, and I think oftentimes we assume that a lot of other entities are carrying that voice forward, but one of my key learnings is that we all have a role to play here. So I encourage you all to get involved and to tap into the the power of your own individual organization and the people that can assist you with that. So we can go on to the next slide. So one of the things that we talked about as an organization is that, we have this tremendous opportunity to come together and think about, what has been put forth in terms of resources around health and safety guides and protocols. A lot of our member organizations and a lot of other entities did a fantastic job early on coming together to put forward a lot of key work. One of the things that this Apex Business Recovery Task Force really felt was important is that we wanted to try to, be sort of the great explainers and do some aggregating and curating all these different resources that were available and to try to make sense of them in a way that really offered some practical solutions and some context. So we put together this task force. It represents key sectors and regions globally. We also wanted to get together and really think about how are we going to approach this work? What is the most meaningful way for these, industry professionals that have so much experience and commitment and passion to really showing up in a meaningful way, organize our thinking so that at the end of the day, we're putting together, again, some really meaningful content in terms of additional curating and aggregating of these resources. So we can go on to the next slide. We decided it was really important, and this is where I think, some of the really interesting conversations were had. It was really important to have this work be grounded in some values and a vision, a common vision that we would work from. And again, this was a group of over 40 individuals from across the globe, and we did a bit of a dialogue and a curation around this exercise, and we came to, these 4 core values: and trust, equity, community, and innovation. And I really think this conversation around trust is so important. I think it's going to be foundational as we start to think about, renewal and our resilience. And until we establish trust, I think that there's going to be continued concern around how do we really create a roadmap and a path forward. And we can go on to the next slide. We determined that, after the vision and the values were set, we determined that the methods would be our key areas of focus. And of course, we have health and safety, we have community, we have a focus on the workforce, reskilling the industry for what is coming next. We have notions around digital transformation and innovations, of course, risk mitigation and advocacy. And, one of the things that I think differentiates the Apex Task Force work with some of the other endeavors is really that this group is following a bit of a dual path. While we know that there's some short-term needs around health and safety guidance and protocols, we also know that there's a long-term need to continue to discuss how do we support the workforce, how do we show up in the short term and in the long term to help people understand that this industry is resilient and we have a strong future ahead of us, that, we might not be able to look towards the future and envision that which was the past, but together with our resources and our commitment again to this collaboration and this unity, we can really come out of this stronger and more prepared and more relevant than we were previously. So really excited again to pull together this group of 40 people and think deeply about these areas of focus. And really today is all about this first piece that we put out, this meeting and event design guide that really speaks to the heart of where we are right now in terms of really needing to establish trust and, really understanding the role that we each play as individuals in that path forward. And then how do we better understand, analyze, and mitigate risk and set metrics for success. And it really, at the end of the day, does come down to communication. So we can go on to the next slide. The work streams, again, with the methodologies that we shared with you just on the previous slide, we looked at some of these key sectors. And again, this task force has subject matter expertise in these core areas and represents, globally a community that's, keenly focused in these core areas of our business. It's interesting, again, thinking about that dual path. We've talked a lot as an industry around our commitment to advocacy or our commitment to wellness, the duty of care that event organizers and participants know is so important. Over the years, we've had tremendous focus on safety and security at our events. Now that we are here where we are in light of this crisis, I think this is an opportunity for us, again, to take a step back to reflect on the things that we know to be true, our values, and how important it is to be grounded in that as we move forward and think about our future. So we can go on to the next slide. At this point in the program, I hope that I've teed it up adequately. I'm going to turn it over to Liz, and she is going to walk you through the first piece of this guidance tool and really set things up for Allison and Kathy. But again, before I turn it over to Liz, I just want to reiterate our deep gratitude to this group. I think this is a fantastic resource and tool, and I'm so pleased to see so many people here today to learn more about it. With that, Liz, please feel free to take it away, my dear.
Great. Thank you, Amy. And thank you to everybody who dialed in today. I want to, first of all, thank the team that helped put this together. Amy mentioned it at the beginning, some of the names you see on this list. And as Amy mentioned, we have some people that weren't able to join us, but it was a collaborative effort and just great strength and experience to draw from in drafting these guidelines. So before we jump into the first page, and I think we can go to the next slide. And the next slide, because I'm going to touch on all these pieces. Great. So this is the ebook that if you haven't had a chance to download it, definitely do that. And I'm going to set the stage for you before we get into the first slide. And that is that when our group came together several months ago, the scope of what we could tackle was huge. And we made a decision that we wanted to have a document that was user-friendly for a lot of different audience groups. So whether you were a corporate planner or on the trade association side or government or nonprofit, we wanted you to have a tool and resources that could work for you. So you'll see that our approach was not a one-size-fits-all. We wanted to have something broad enough that it had application in a number of different market segments, and so you're going to see that today. The other piece that's worth mentioning is this has global reach. So while the majority of people that were on my team work out of the US, all of us have global experience and drew from that as well as other colleagues on the EIC. So the application of the tools and resources in this document really can work whether you're in Brazil or the UK or the US. So with that, and then one other point worth talking about before we jump into the first page is that the EIC's approach to this which is their approach for all the work that they do, as Amy mentioned, is to aggregate and curate information. And while we thought that was a tremendous value, we also felt a responsibility in our team that we needed to create more than just curated work. We felt like we wanted to take it to the next step, which is to create a path forward, and that's under the umbrella of guidelines. They're not standards. The EIC nor anyone on our working team, wanted the responsibility of establishing standards. That's not our role. But what we did want to do was create some guidelines and a framework that would help you make decisions moving forward. So with that, we can go to the first page. So as you go through this document, you're going to see information about the Events Industry Council and the table of contents, and we can go to the next page. You'll see a foreword from Amy, then a foreword from our working group, and that's the piece I just talked to was setting the stage is actually in that. So we can go to the next page. So here you're seeing 2 pages at once, so if you can, stay with me on the first page, don't go to the second page. So on the first page, we're serving this up as 3 key areas that build the foundation of what we're going to share with you today. One is on the objective, and as Amy mentioned, trust is just a pivotal piece. So we needed to reestablish trust with our key decision makers in any of our organizations about bringing people back together again in in-person meetings. So some of the tools here will help you with that. The second one is, who's the audience for this document? While we want you as the planner to use it as a tool, it's also meant as a document to help you in conversations with key decision makers, because a lot of the information in this document will be questions that they're asking you, and this can help your response in answering those questions. And then third, the most valuable piece we think is takeaway tools. We wanted you to have material that you can use, not just us talking about our point of view on things. We wanted you to have specific tools that would work for you. And so in that takeaway toolbox, if you will, there's a meeting and event decision grid, which I'm going to address shortly. There's attendee guidelines and code of conduct, which Kathy will take on. There's meeting and event sort of success metrics, which Kathy will also talk to. Then communication, stakeholder communications is really a key piece. What do you say and who do you say it to and when do you say it is really fundamental to getting your message across. So Allison is going to deal with that as well as touch on the overall resource that we have for you at the end. So when we look at key questions, when we talk to our colleagues in the US or around the globe, there's 3 things that constantly came to the surface. One was, what data points do I need to really influence my key stakeholders, the decision maker, meeting attendees, that it's really safe to go back to in-person meetings? And for that, we're going to give you the meeting and event decision grid, which I'm going to talk to, which is on the next page. There's the other piece around that is the communications tool, which Allison will talk you through. Second question we were hearing a lot of, what's the expectation of attendees for people to come back? What's their expectation and how do we address that? So for that, Kathy's going to talk you through the attendee guidelines and the code of conduct. And one side comment I'll make on this is when we started our discussions and our work around this guideline framework, we were initially looking at 2 key stakeholders. One was the venue or the hotel, and the other one was the hosting organization. But as we did a deeper dive into that, we really thought that if we want to create a healthy environment, we have to bring back, there's another piece that was missing initially, and that was the attendee. So we integrated them into the process that they are a significant contributor in creating that healthy, safe environment. And Kathy's going to talk you through that a little bit more. Then the third question we've heard from people is, where are the resources? Where do I go to find additional information? And so for that, we're giving you, success metrics to help you, but also your own organization's approach to risk management. You really need to understand what's the risk appetite of your organization. And if you're not sure about that, that's a conversation to have with either your risk management folks, if you have them on staff, security people, employee relations, sometimes legal. So all of them, depending on their various disciplines, have a certain point of view on risk and the toleration of risk. And I think it's important for you to get informed within your own culture, your own organization, of where does your group fall in the risk assessment line. And then, as I also mentioned, another tool as a resource will be this global resource that Amy mentioned in the beginning, which is at the end of this document. So next we'll go to the meeting and event decision grid. So one of the big challenges that I think we're all dealing with, not just on a work perspective, but on a personal level, is dealing with the volatility in the marketplace of what's happening relative to hot zones and safe zones. But before I jump into this, sorry, because we just added this morning, is we have 3 polls we're going to roll out today. And the first poll we're going to send to you right now. You have 25 seconds to answer it. And the question is, which Derek's going to pull up on the screen, the question that we'd like you to answer is, let's see if it's coming up. I'm not going back to in-person meetings until a vaccine is in widespread distribution in the country where I live. If you wouldn't mind, we wanted to do a pulse check on this. If you wouldn't mind answering that, either I agree, I disagree, or I'm not sure, that would be great. Okay, so while that's happening, I'm going to continue on with the meeting and event grid. So this flexible framework, oh, okay, let's see, let's watch how this is going. Okay, all right. I think we're at the 25-second mark. So thank you for participating in that. I think it just gives us a sense of kind of how people are feeling. And we'll come back to that a little bit later at the end. So the one thing that's interesting about this, and I've dealt with, and I'm sure a lot of you have, with norovirus and Zika, it was more as a finite amount of time and how we had to deal with situations, and even broader than health issues, things around elements that create an operational stop to your meeting. So whether that's a weather situation of a snowstorm shutting down an airport. So we've all dealt with those situations. And the thing that's so distinctive about this situation is that it's still evolving. You know, there's not a clear end in sight. So when there's been snowstorms, like when I worked in Boston, or as we discussed, airport shutdowns, those are finite in nature. And there's so much, even though they're tough to handle, they're manageable because they're finite in nature. So this situation is different. And so we had to address the ebb and flow of the risk level and map that to the safety piece of in-person meetings. So what we did was create 4 risk levels. Level 4, and I'm not going to go through all the bullets, but I'll just highlight 1 or 2. Level 4 is peak sustained transmission. So that's what, if you were in the US, you went through that in March, April, early May in most states in the US. And there were market indicators that showed you that there was peak sustained transmission. So it basically, and if you look through those bullets, I'll just read 1 or 2, you know, restrictions on mass gatherings, which is kind of a stab in the heart of meetings. Social distancing and face mask is mandatory. Then that really put a quick stop to meetings, face-to-face meetings. And so it flipped for most of us to virtual meetings. Level 3 is initial de-escalation. A lot of those similar market indicators are still in place, but they're reduced in severity. So there could still be restrictions on mass gathering. And now you'll see that mask wearing and social distancing is more encouraged than mandatory. So you're seeing things drop in severity, but honestly, there's still enough significant indicators that in most cases, meetings, in-person meetings are still not happening. So now you drop to level 2, de-escalation with caution. So there are things, market indicators are still dropping in severity. You're seeing other things pick up. So air travel is increasing. Your business in terms of offices, if you have more than 1 office, more people are going back to work. Your own organization has minimize some of the safety guidelines that were in place in levels 4 and 3. So you're seeing enough things that you're getting confirmation and validation that you can go back to work, back to work too, but also to meetings. And so you're seeing on the flip side, the second half of the column, information around meetings and events going back in venues and hotels. One thing we did not address in our document was the cost implications of any of this. And honestly, we made a decision as a group not to go there because there's different contracts in place, different relationships in place. Some hotels are opting to put their own protocols regardless of group meetings. let's say temperature screening at the entrance. They're opting to put that in place as part of their own protocols. So we didn't want to put in some things here that became outdated. But what we did want to put in was things that you should consider and review, and then you decide whether it's relevant to you or not. Level 1, which is what we're all hoping to get to as soon as we can, is business as usual. I don't know if I'd ever say it's business as it used to be, because I don't think that's ever going to be the case. I think we're going to see coming out of this that there's going to be a long-term shelf life for a number of the health and safety practices, whether that's hand washing or potentially buffet situations in some hotels. I don't know. You're going to see people looking at how people connect in an in-person meeting through a different lens. So more to come, I think, as we get into that. So this is a key piece, a foundation of our work, is this 4-tier grid. And hopefully we want it, the beauty of it is, regardless of what city, state, country you're in, because you might be in a different level depending on where you are, you have market indicators that help you with this. The other thing what I said would reference is this has to be in alignment with your own city and state and country's regulations, as well as organizational protocols that your group has. And then I have one more page, and then it'll be over to Kathy. So we're on to the next page. So there's one other piece we wanted to add as a resource for you in this, looking at a decision, a risk grid, and that is looking for scientific data to partner with the other information I just shared with you. And because EIC is a global organization, their primary resource would be the World Health Organization as the scientific go-to entity to get additional information. And you'll have links when you go into the site and have that. You'll see that their decision matrix below is very similar, partners really well with the grid that we have in place. So between the two tools, we feel like you have a really great head start to decisions, conversations with your key decision makers to decide, is this the right time to book in-person meetings? So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kathy, and we'll take some questions when we get to the end. Thank you. Over to you, Kathy.
Okay. I hope folks can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you.
And see me. So keep me posted on that.
Okay.
It's a privilege. I just want to say, by way of starting, that it's been a real privilege to work on this Business Recovery Task Force, and especially on the wonderful sub-team of passionate and dedicated leaders. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Code of Conduct, which I know has been a hot topic of interest for everyone. And what I'd say by way of introduction is that in the early days, there was a lot of interest focused on figuring out, a lot of the interest and focus was really on figuring out how the host was going to respond versus the attendee. And the hotels and venues, as you all know, have really stepped up with a lot of detailed guidance, and you can see some of that in the glossary of this resource. But it turns out that the even bigger concern as things have unfolded for many planners and attendees is not actually the venue procedures. There's greater confidence in that now, but the attendee behavior. And as Liz mentioned, it's apparent that the attendees, in fact, do need to own a piece of the responsibility to maintain a safe and healthy environment. And so it's with that spirit that we created this Code of Conduct. And what is the definition of a Code of Conduct? It's designed to be a collection of rules and regulations, including what is and is not acceptable behavior. And I just thought quickly, if we could, we have a poll to ask all of you how many of you actually have a current and existing Code of Conduct in place. So if you take and quickly fill that out, we will show you the results, and I'll get on with the discussion of the Code of Conduct. Essentially, more and more meeting and event organizers are creating codes of conduct that outline the objectives for attendees with the aim of creating a safe and enjoyable environment for an experience for everyone. In turn, meeting and event. Oh, so here's our results. You can see that about 40% yes, 47 no, and 13 uncertain. So mixed bag there, but a true opportunity, I think, in this environment. But setting expectations, meeting and attendees need to take ownership of certain personal protocols to ensure that the environment is healthy and safe as much as is possible. And whether you do have an existing code of conduct or you plan to create one or simply want guidance to share with your attendees, we've included a starter set here. And I'm not sure if we can zoom in on this code of conduct. I know this is a hard format to read. We decided to go with the flipbook so you could see the functionality of how this will work. And obviously it's very easy to download. But consider adding these guidelines or a code of conduct to your event website or your registration process. And even if your organization isn't ready to create it or adopt a code of conduct, the information listed here provides good guidance to attendees about the expected behavior. And a few high points for this, we have it divided in 3 sections: pre-conference, on-site, or pre-event, on-site, and post-event. And some of the items in pre-event are making sure that the attendee is following WHO guidance and adhering to government and travel restrictions, personally evaluating their own health and making the decision to stay at home if they're sick, while on site. Obviously, the everyday preventative basics around hand washing, no face touching, taking temperature checks if those are available on site, and then finally post, if you were to have tested positive for COVID, post the event, the processes for informing the meeting organizers or event organizers. And so that's sort of the basics of the code of conduct. And now I'd just like to move over to the metrics piece, which is on the next page. And what we have done here is we've created some thought starters and benchmarks to evaluate the success of holding in-person meetings and events as things begin to come back. And what we're suggesting is that, you normally hold yourself accountable. We hold ourselves accountable to certain meetings and events objectives, but we're suggesting adding, sort of the current environment specific metrics and benchmarks because they're critically important. And these are designed to be customized to fit your organization. And again, we've divided them into 2 categories, sort of the kind of metrics you should be considering before the vaccine and those after a vaccine is available for widespread distribution. And sort of some examples from here are before, making sure that event planners do have access to resources, that the hotels and other venues are implementing safe meeting practices, and that attendees feel safe, which can be determined or understood better through some pre and post registration or pre-registration and post-event surveys. And then afterwards, similar kinds of metrics, but determining what is the correct amount of social distancing, how is hotel occupancy faring as a consideration, and just these are obviously very personalized metrics to your organization, but we have put together what we think is a framework and a starter set for your consideration. And with that, I'd like to pass it over to Allison, who will talk to you about communications considerations. Thank you.
Good morning. We're going to do one more quick survey. If we can put that up on the screen, about the most important factor of getting in-person meetings started again. This one is a little bit longer, and if you can go through this, and Derek, give it a couple more seconds because there's a few more things to read. This is not a pop quiz based on the first 2 presentations, but what you're feeling as far as what is the most important factor to get this going again. I will say that my favorite answer, although probably not the most serious, is the ability to find one's suitcase again. All right. It's wonderful to have processes and decision grids in place, but unless we're building the trust that we need to get people meeting again, trust and health coming up as number one. I would agree with that. Thanks very much. Unless we're communicating all the information that we've just put in place, we're not going to be building that trust. So what we've captured here is some communication considerations. This is not by no means a full-on communication plan for your meetings, but some things that you need to take into consideration. What we found was when the pandemic first hit our industry, a lot of us were really uncertain, unsurprisingly, as to the impact it would have on our events. And that uncertainty caused some organizations to freeze and not be sure what to say to their meeting constituents. Some of the questions that came up were, what do you say? When do you say it? And most importantly, when will we know more? And I know that's a question that is top of mind for absolutely everyone. I would love to say that we have the answer to that, but we have to work with the information that we have and the changing situation that COVID has presented. What we determined is, in a situation like this, communications is not saying that you have all the answers, but putting information out there so that people know that you are on top of the situation as much as you can. Going back to the question of trust, it's important to craft a communications strategy to let people know a couple things. First, that you're aware of the current situation. And second, that as an organization, as the organization holding an event, you're addressing the situation. So initial things, as pointed out in the first parts of this presentation, is, can a meeting be held? Very important. And what are the decisions, what is that decision based on? It's important to focus on authentic messaging, not going back to marketing speak, but addressing the concerns that the audience have about health and safety. The communications should really focus on clarity in the messaging as opposed to certainty, because certainty is something that is really a rare commodity these days. If it's determined that your meeting is going to be held, what are some of the things that you need to address and clarify? One is going to be how the experience will be different. How will the arrival at the hotel be different? What are you doing as far as health and safety with food and beverage, with social distancing, with meeting schedules as they adapt to being able to move people safely in the meeting environment? And then also, what are the expectations of the attendee themselves? And this is where the code of conduct comes into play. It's really important to schedule and tailor your messages so that to cover all stakeholders, not just attendees, not just exhibitors, not just your internal staff, because different parts of that constituency is going to get different information. Internal staff and vendors are going to really need to know the details of what you've put together, whereas attendees, exhibitors, speakers need to have information to know what to expect leading up to and during the meeting. So we've listed the key stakeholders here as a reminder that this is a bigger community than just your attendees. Finally, I'm going to ask for the next page. We've put together a resource guide. This is by no means definitive because more information is coming out absolutely every day. I know that we have all received emails with various protocols, plans, and processes being put in place by everybody from individual meeting owners to individual hotels to large chains, corporate-wide protocols. This portion of the guide is intended to capture a cross-section of those documents that are available out there and give you a little bit of a description, so that if you've got a question on a specific aspect of your meeting, you can more readily get your answers, get questions answered. This is going to be part of the living document that is going to be added to. And there are, I think, 4 pages of resources here in our initial capture of the information that's available. So that's the resource guide. Again, I'm seeing quite a few questions as to whether people can get the slides and where to access this flip book, and it is on the EIC web page for you to download and make your own, really. With that, I'm going to flip it back over to Amy. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Liz and Kathy and Allison. Great job. So I was asking the Derek to flip to the next piece of the resource guide, because there were some questions about how applicable and this is from a global perspective. So I just wanted to make sure that the audience can see that we've taken a tremendous amount of time to curate this section of the resource page for that very reason, because we know, there are going to be sort of what we are calling guidelines that are applicable globally and then have to be navigated and interpreted at the local level, as we've seen with the transmission rates and the ebb and flow of this virus, that we are going to continue to have to monitor the reality of what's happening at all levels in order to make informed decisions and really analyze risk appropriately. But I did just want to, again, thank the working group, those present today and those not, for their tremendous work. Again, going back to the intention of the APEX Task Force Working Group is really to kind of take a step back and look at all of this information, a myriad information that has been made available to us, really fabulous work, quite frankly, from the private sector and the large governing bodies, and then try to pull it together in such a way that we really had a tremendously resourceful piece for you all to go to. And the other piece of this resource is, on the EIC website, you can find a repository of additional information that we've pulled together on your behalf. And as Liz, Kathy, and Allison mentioned, this is really a living work stream, just like all of the work that will come subsequent to this first piece. We consider this to be very much a living document, and we know, based on new information, science, and so forth becoming available, that we'll need to be able to go back and update that and or issue, quite frankly, new information material that the group will ideate as we go forward through space and time. So I think that we're going to allow some time for Q&A, and I believe, Mariella, you had some predetermined questions that we wanted to offer up.
Absolutely. First, thank you to everyone who sent questions in advance. We actually had over 800 questions submitted, but there were definitely some recurring themes that we've bundled together to start the conversation. And the first one I'm going to actually open up as a discussion for all of us here on the call, and that is, what do you think will end up being the permanent changes to the way that we run events? Maybe Liz, if you could start us off.
Sure. As I mentioned kind of briefly in some of my comments, I think we're going to find some of the health and safety pieces having a long shelf life. So whether that's hand sanitizers or more of a thought process around how we're doing group gatherings around food and beverage, whether that's cocktail parties or other social interactions. I think also transportation, how are we moving people around when we're taking them out of the hotel to other venues? We didn't specifically address that because it's coming from another working group who's focused solely on transportation. But I think you're going to see the impact of COVID from a health safety perspective touch a number of areas, hotel rooms, in terms of the sleeping rooms, not necessarily function space and how those are managed. So I think you're going to see it across the board in a lot of different areas.
I think that I'm going to add on to what Liz said, and I think one of the key takeaways is awareness of the participant as an active, as having active personal responsibility for their own safety and well-being. So it's I think we're going to see a lot more codes of conduct, and people being asked to assess what they're walking into with meetings and being personally responsible for some of that.
Yeah, I
guess
agree.
I would just want to add to that too, because I think there's tremendous value in the power of everybody sort of owning that role to play as we think about, there were some questions around advocacy, and there's been some questions around, personal, assessing personal risk. But at the end of the day, we, by honoring that role and taking on that commitment very seriously and consistently, we are not only preserving the well-being of those around us in the short term, we are actually working towards our sustainable future. We all, I think, understand that, but the aggregate commitment, I think, is really powerful, and I think it really is a reflection of our belief in the value of this industry. And so I was excited to see, on the poll that, this is something that I think can help not only this audience, but quite frankly, so many that are struggling with, the availability of a code, but then how to create the inspiration and the motivation to participate in it. It's something that might be culturally new for some organizations or at some, events, but I think moving forward, even as we come out of this and even after we have a vaccine, we're an industry that's been committed to wellness and committed to creating safe environments, and I think this is a really big, important part of that dialogue. So.
Yes, and I agree, and I think the question of business as usual, none of us know exactly when that is going to transpire or if that will even be possible again. However, I think certainly understanding or the way we're all going to look at it, whether you're an attendee, you're a supplier, you're a planner, I think you're going to be doing things and thinking about things very differently, certainly for the near term and probably for the long term as well. We all have every hope and expectation that live events will be back in full force again. But I think we have all learned a lot from this, and it may be a long road back, and so we're adaptable and we're going to keep changing and keep evolving as things unfold.
Yeah, I agree. There's a lot of questions about what our future holds, and there's terminology and language, and in some discussions with other groups, this group, we have a new road ahead of us. And that's a positive thing in many respects, right, Liz?
Yeah, and one other comment to build on, Amy, what you said around culture is it's really important, if the code of conduct is a tool that works for you, is to get the leadership of your organization on board as advocates, because they need to spread the word that this is important to bringing meetings, face-to-face meetings back. So understanding the culture of the group that you work in and how do you navigate that with these different tools is an insight and a value you as the planner can bring to the discussion. So that's an important piece.
Excellent, thank you. And I'm going to direct it a little bit to Kathy first. Do you think that virtual and hybrid meetings are the future of the industry in some aspect?
As I was stating before, live events are definitely coming back. I know we all believe that. But I think this time period, we've all learned a lot about the opportunity that both virtual and hybrid present. I mean, none of us love being on virtual meetings every hour of every day. However, they've expanded our horizons on what what can be done. And I think what I'm imagining, obviously I don't have a crystal ball, but what I'm imagining is that, live is coming back, but hybrid is going to have a big role to play going forward, because it can extend audiences, it can engage audiences differently, and yeah, that's my point of view on that.
Excellent. Any other thoughts from the panel on the increased integration of technology in the future of event design?
Yeah, I mean, you go, Allison.
I think I agree with Kathy entirely. I think that we're learning about how we're expanding audiences, how we're reaching people that we might not have, and the power of expanding our audiences. Excuse me, sorry, is a strong and compelling reason to look at the incorporation of hybrid meetings.
Excellent.
Yeah, and then one other thing I'd add to that is, on the technology side, is you're going to see, I think, exploration in areas beyond Microsoft Teams, Zoom, Skype, because as people get more used to and understand and get comfortable with using or being on the receiving end of the technology, I think some of our needs are going to change. And there could be expanded needs around additional functionality or branding, or how do we link in trade shows and exhibits from a meeting. So once that starts to expand, there are other service providers, then people are going to look at, if they have a need for expanded functionality, I think the universe is going to open up more. But it'll never replace, as everyone has already said, face-to-face meetings. But it is, I think people have seen cost savings as well as savings of wear and tear on road warriors that travel a lot. So there's a benefit to the virtual side, but I think, and on the hybrid side as well, but it'll play a bigger role than it has in the past, but it'll never replace face-to-face or in-person meetings.
I think if anything comes out of COVID, it will be an accelerated conversation around these topics, around virtual and hybrid. We've been flirting with it out there, but this will actually accelerate the conversation.
Right.
The only thing I would add, Mariella, to the comments already made is that, we talk a lot about accessibility and creating welcoming environments, and fundamentally the notion of hybrid allows us to not only acquire new participants and create engagement with new audiences, it allows us to, accommodate the needs of the variety of people that, and the communities that we serve. So I think there's tremendous value and tremendous learnings for all of us in doing so. So it's a very positive outcome of a very tough.
Yeah, and virtual and hybrid creates different kinds of engagement opportunities than we thought about. That's another thing we've all learned in this time period, and engagement is so important. There's some things, again, that you'll never be able to substitute versus an in-person or face-to-face, but there are other ways to engage people, and this time period has shown us that it's possible.
Right.
Great, and we've had a number of questions that we're going to direct to some of our other work groups. So I know that we had some questions around managing increased space needs and different formats for layouts. Those will be coming as part of the work stream coming from some of our other working groups. But I'm going to bring it back to Amy. If you could tell us, we've talked a little bit about the global aspect to these pieces, but could you tell us a little bit about how, when you look at different regulations in different stages in different regions, how does this meeting design guide work within those the differences regionally?
Well, I think as the panelists have noted, the thought process and the tools that are available have a very broad perspective, right? And as organizers, it's really important to understand the broad guidance, right? If you think about, what WHO has suggested to us, we would start there and then interpret that information from a local perspective, and then really understand not only the regional elements of where we might be hosting, but where our participants might be coming from and traveling to and from relative to what's happening on the ground. I think this is an uncomfortable reality for many people. I know there's been a lot of discussions around, well, we need a standard globally. Well, I don't know that this industry is going to ever be able to put forth a global standard around that particular piece of it. There are nuances that will always exist based on what is happening within that particular jurisdiction. And as we've seen, what's happening here in the United States is very different than what's happening currently, in China, where they've had successful reopening of, some very significant trade shows. The UK just got some very positive news about their ability to reopen this fall. So we're just going to really have to, take the time to better understand what is the global guidance and how do we interpret it at the regional and local levels.
Excellent. Well, we are at the end of our time here, but I'd like to thank all of our panelists for participating in today's event, and thank you for the incredible work that you've done for the industry in developing this resource. We will be sending out an email to all of you with a link, but it is also available in the chat if you would like to access the guide now, as well as the code of conduct. We will be updating those, and so you can also make sure to go back to our site regularly. You'll start to see more news coming out from us about the next deliverables that should be released soon as well. And with that, we'll call it the end of our session, and thank you very much, everyone, for your participation today.
Great.
Thank you, everyone. Great job.
Thank you, everybody.
Well done, guys.
Thanks.
Bye.